Hey guys, in today's video, we bring you the incredible story of Raylan Thorne, a student who died for 7 minutes and came back with an urgent warning from Jesus about what awaits us in November. What he saw on the other side will change his outlook on life and death forever. So leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because this story is truly impactful. Hello, my name is Raylan Thorne, and I have a story to share with you. I'm not someone extraordinary, at least I wasn't until a few months ago. I'm just a 21-year-old college student in Boulder, Colorado, trying to find my way in the world like everyone else my age. I attend the local university. I live in a small apartment close to the campus, and I lead a very ordinary life, or at least I did until the day of the accident. I have always been a practical person, one of those who need to see to believe. I grew up in a middle-class family, with parents who taught me the importance of hard work and education. I was never particularly religious or spiritual, although I respected the beliefs of others. My life revolved around studies, a few close friends, and my plans for the future, which, I must admit, were nothing extraordinary. I'm here today to share something that has completely changed my perspective on life, death, and everything in between. It's a story I still have trouble fully processing, even after all this time. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, remembering every detail as if it happened just a few minutes ago. You know, it's weird being here, telling you this. Part of me still questions whether I should share this experience, whether people will believe it or whether they will judge me. But something inside me, something I learned along my journey, tells me this story needs to be told. Not for me, but for all those who may need to hear that there is something beyond this reality that we know. Before the accident, I was like many young people my age, full of certainties about how the world worked, convinced that reality was only what we could see and touch. Now, as I sit here, preparing to tell you what happened on that seemingly ordinary morning, I realize how wrong I was, how wrong we all can be about the true nature of existence. It was an absolutely ordinary morning in Boulder. The sun shone through the trees that lined the campus streets, creating that play of light and shadow that has always fascinated me. I was on my scooter, making the usual route to university. The air was crisp, with that signature scent of Colorado mornings, a mix of pine trees and dew that always made me feel alive. I remember every detail of that morning perfectly, as if my brain had decided to record every second in high definition. I was wearing my favorite jacket, the brown leather one that my mother always criticized for thinking it was too thin for the local climate. My backpack was lighter than usual. I only had a laptop and a few notebooks for my morning classes. Traffic was calm, as it usually is at that time. I continued on my way, thinking about the day's classes, the assignments I needed to deliver, a meeting I had scheduled for the weekend. Common thoughts of someone who has no idea that their life is about to change completely. That's when it happened. A little squirrel decided to cross the street right in front of me. It was a split second, but I remember seeing its small, bright eyes, its furry tail held high in alert. My instinct was to swerve, a decision that would change everything. I turned the handlebars sharply, trying to avoid the small animal. The scooter skidded, and I completely lost control. The world began to spin in slow motion. I could see the asphalt approaching, the trees rotating in my field of vision, the blue sky mixing with the green of the leaves. I felt the impact before it even happened. My right hand was the first to hit the ground, followed by the rest of my body. The pain was instant and overwhelming. I remember hearing screams. Maybe they were mine. Maybe they were from other people on the street. The world began to darken at the edges of my vision, like an old photograph slowly burning. The transition was surprisingly smooth. One moment I was feeling the excruciating pain of the accident, and the next, everything was different. The pain simply disappeared, as if someone had turned off a switch. It was replaced by a feeling of lightness that I had never experienced before. It is difficult to describe in earthly words something that transcends our normal understanding of sensations. Suddenly, I found myself in an environment that defied all the laws of physics I knew. I was in a space that seemed infinite, but at the same time intimate. The walls, if I can call them that, were made of a material that looked like marble, but emanated its own light, soft and welcoming. The columns rose as far as I could see, disappearing into a ceiling that seemed not to exist. The atmosphere there was unlike anything I have ever experienced. The air, if I can call what I was breathing that, had a special quality. It was as if each breath filled me, not just with oxygen, but with pure life energy. Colors that don't exist in our visible spectrum danced in the air, creating patterns that seemed to tell ancient stories. The silence was deep, but it was not empty. It was a living silence, full of meaning, as if it were filled with all the truths of the universe. It was as if I could hear the very fabric of reality breathing around me. At that moment, I realized I was experiencing something that was beyond my normal human understanding. My consciousness felt expanded. I could feel every particle of my being vibrating in harmony with that environment. I no longer had the feeling of being limited to a physical body. It was as if my essence had spread out, becoming part of that sacred space. Every thought seemed to echo around the room, creating ripples of light and energy. It was in this state of deep contemplation that I realized I was not alone. A presence began to manifest itself, initially as a subtle vibration in the air, then as a light that took shape. It was Alan, my spiritual guide. Although at that moment I still didn't know his name, the figure that materialized before me had an ethereal quality that defied description. Alan, as I soon discovered his name, was not exactly what we imagine a spiritual being to be. There were no wings or halo, nor any other element that our popular culture associates with celestial beings. Instead, he seemed simultaneously familiar and otherworldly, as if he could be anyone you've ever met, and, at the same time, someone completely unique. His presence exuded a serenity that instantly calmed my initial confusion. His eyes, if I can call them that, seemed to contain entire galaxies, deep and ancient, but also welcoming and kind. When he smiled, it was as if the entire environment around us responded, pulsing with a more intense light. "Welcome, Raylan," he said, without actually using words. It was more like his thoughts materialized directly into my consciousness. His voice, or rather, his energy, carried a tone of recognition, as if we had known each other for a long time. And maybe we really knew each other, I realized later. Alan explained, with infinite patience, that he was there to guide me on this journey. His every gesture seemed to carry deep meanings, as if he was teaching me not just through communication, but through existence itself. When he moved, space seemed to move with him, as if they were one thing. The most fascinating thing was how he managed to transmit knowledge without having to explain it. All it took was one look, one subtle movement, and I understood complex concepts I had never considered before. It was as if he had direct access to my understanding, surpassing the barriers of language and linear thought. As we talked, if I can call that exchange a conversation, I realized that Alan was not just guiding me, but helping me awaken to a greater reality. Every question I had was answered before it was even formulated, not with words, but with understandings that arose naturally in my consciousness. Alan led me through several halls, each with its own purpose and unique energy. The first was what he called the Newcomers' Hall. It was a large and welcoming space, where other souls, because that's what we were there, adjusted to the new reality. Some looked confused, others amazed, and some simply at peace. I watched an elderly man undergo an extraordinary transformation before my eyes. As a counselor spoke gently to him, his wrinkles began to fade, his body straightened, as if the weight of earthly years was being gently lifted. It was fascinating to see how age and physical limitations had no meaning on that plane. In another hall, I witnessed moving meetings between souls. Family and friends who had left before were reunited in embraces of pure light. The energy of love in these encounters was so intense that it seemed to create waves of colors in the environment, each emotion manifesting itself in different tones and vibrations. What impressed me most was how each hall seemed to adapt to the needs of its occupants. For some, the environment appeared as a serene garden. For others, like a welcoming library. It was as if the space itself responded to the thoughts and needs of each soul present. In one particularly touching moment, I saw a young mother being comforted by her guides as she watched, through something like a dimensional window, at her children on Earth. The guides gently explained how she could remain connected to them, even from a different dimension. The scene made me understand that bonds of love transcend the barriers between worlds. Alan explained that these halls served as adaptation areas, where each soul could process their transition in their own time. There was no rush. There was no judgment. Each person had the time necessary to understand their new reality and prepare for the next steps of their spiritual journey. The amphitheater where my life review took place was unlike anything I had ever seen. Imagine being surrounded by screens of pure energy, each showing different moments of your existence, not just like a movie, but like a complete immersive experience. It was like being in every moment of my life simultaneously. The scenes did not follow a traditional chronological order. Instead, they were organized by emotional connections and impacts made. I saw moments I had completely forgotten about. A kind smile to a stranger who was having a difficult day. Harsh words spoken to a friend in a moment of anger. Small acts of kindness I didn't even realize I had performed. The most surprising thing was being able to feel not only my own emotions, but also those of the people affected by my actions. When I relived an argument with my mother during my teenage years, I could feel her concern, her love, and her frustration as if they were my own feelings. It was a completely new and, at times, overwhelming perspective. Alan was by my side throughout the process, offering silent guidance as I processed each revelation. There was no judgment in his presence, just understanding and support. When more difficult scenes came up, moments I wasn't proud of, he gently helped me understand the larger context and the lessons that could be learned. The most fascinating thing was seeing how small actions that I considered insignificant had profound impacts on other people's lives. A particularly powerful moment was when I saw how a simple act of kindness, helping a lost freshman on campus, triggered a series of positive events in his life that I had never known about. Each memory was more than just a memory. It was an opportunity for deep understanding. I saw how each choice, each word, each gesture was connected in a complex web of cause and effect. It was as if I could see the fabric of life itself being woven before my eyes, each thread representing a connection, a decision, a moment of growth. The space that Alan called the Cosmic Planetarium was unlike any observatory I had ever visited on Earth. It was like being suspended in the cosmos itself, but with an expanded understanding that allowed me to see beyond what human eyes can normally perceive. Galaxies danced around us, not as distant points of light, but as living, pulsating entities. In this extraordinary place, I was able to observe life in its most varied forms. Alan showed me civilizations on other worlds, some so different from ours that they could barely be understood by our limited minds. Some existed in frequencies of light that our eyes cannot capture. Others lived in dimensions that our science cannot yet conceive. The most impressive thing was being able to perceive the connection between all these worlds. It was as if the entire universe was a great symphony, each planet, each being, each particle of existence contributing its own note to a universal song. The Earth, which had always seemed so big and important to me, now revealed itself as just a small note in this cosmic symphony. As we floated through this infinite space, Alan showed me how each civilization was at its own stage of evolution. Some were just beginning their journey of consciousness. Others had already transcended what we consider physical reality. It was humbling to see how our humanity was just one of countless other thinking species in the universe. In the planetarium, I was also able to see how time is not linear as we think. It was possible to observe the past, present, and future of different civilizations unfolding simultaneously, like intertwined threads of a cosmic tapestry. Alan explained to me that what we call time is just our limited way of understanding the simultaneity of existence. What impressed me most was realizing how every decision, every thought, every action anywhere in the universe created ripples that affected everything else. It was like seeing an infinite ocean, where every drop was connected to every other drop. This vision made me understand that nothing in the universe is truly separate or isolated. The transition from the planetarium to the library was smooth, as if one setting naturally dissolved into another. This library was unlike anything I had ever seen. The shelves extended infinitely in all directions, not just horizontally, but also vertically, defying the laws of physics as we know them. Each book, if I can call them that, was not made of paper and ink, but of pure energy that pulsed with a life of its own. When Alan approached me with one of them, I realized that I didn't need to open it to read its contents. All I had to do was touch its cover and the information flowed directly into my consciousness, as if it had always been there. These records contained not just historical events, but every thought, every emotion, every dream that ever existed. I saw records of long-forgotten civilizations, love stories that had never been told, discoveries that had yet to be made on Earth. It was as if the entire conscious experience of the universe was cataloged there, The most fascinating thing was how the information connected. One thought led to another, one story intertwined with several others, creating an infinite web of knowledge and experience. Alan explained to me that this library was more than a repository of information. It was the memory of the universe itself. In one particularly poignant moment, I found a record of my own life, not just from this lifetime, but from all the others I've lived. I saw myself in different times, different places, different roles, each life with its own lessons, its own challenges, its own achievements. The library also contained records of the future, not as something predetermined, but as a field of infinite possibilities, each depending on choices made in the present. It was like seeing a river with countless tributaries, each one representing a possible path. The environment changed once again, and I found myself in a field covered in flowers that gave off their own light. Each flower glowed with a different intensity, creating a spectacle of colors that transcended the normal visible spectrum. The air was permeated with an indescribable fragrance, which seemed to carry memories of every garden that had ever existed. It was in this sublime setting that I experienced the most profound moment of my journey. A presence approached, so intense that it was almost impossible to look directly at it. Even before Alan told me, I knew who it was. Jesus was there. His presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, a combination of absolute power and unconditional love that made every cell of my being vibrate in resonance. The light emanating from him was so intense that I couldn't make out a definite shape, but I could feel his gaze piercing through every layer of my existence. When he spoke, they were not words I heard, but truths that materialized directly in my soul. There is no death, he said, and in that moment, I fully understood the meaning of that statement. It was then that he shared with me a crucial revelation about November. His voice, soft but firm, conveyed an important warning. Significant events would occur this month, events that would impact many people across the planet. He emphasized that those who keep their spiritual connection strong, who dedicate themselves to prayer and strengthen their faith, will find protection during these coming events. This message, I realized, was a fundamental part of the reason for my return. I needed to share this warning, this call to spiritual preparation. His presence had a transformative effect on the environment. The flowers seemed to sing. The air vibrated with an energy that I can only describe as pure, crystallized love. Every moment in his presence was like 1,000 years of understanding, unfolding instantly. He showed me how each life is part of a greater plan, how each experience, and even the most painful ones, serves a divine purpose. I saw how love is the most fundamental force in the universe, more basic than gravity, more essential than time and space itself. As Jesus' presence began to dissolve into the illuminated field, I felt a subtle change in the environment. A gentle but insistent force began to pull me back. Alan was by my side again, his face conveying a mixture of satisfaction and serenity. It was at this moment that I realized that my journey on that plane was coming to an end. The portal to my return manifested as a pulsating curtain of light, not unlike the first threshold I crossed, but now charged with a much deeper meaning. Alan explained to me that it was time to return, that my mission on Earth was not yet complete. I felt a mix of reluctance and acceptance, reluctance to leave that state of expanded understanding, but acceptance of the greater purpose that awaited me on the physical plane. The last impressions of that spiritual realm were recorded in my consciousness like seals of light. The feeling of oneness with everything, the understanding of the eternity of life, the unconditional love that permeates all existence, all of it began to condense into memories that I knew I would carry with me. The portal began to pulse more intensely, and I felt my consciousness being gently pulled back into my physical body. Alan's last words were not really words, but a direct transmission of understanding. Every moment of our existence is a sacred opportunity to manifest divine love on the material plane. As I walked back through the portal, every cell of my being vibrated with a fundamental truth I had discovered. We are not just physical bodies having a temporary spiritual experience, but eternal spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.